House settlement gets done in really, I think it changes the sports landscape. Professional and college or amateur sports, like I don't know that we've been amateurs in college athletics for some years, but I feel like people over the weekend were not prepared or hadn't thought about this moment in time that we've been telling you it was a fait accompli. It was done before it was done, long before it was done. And I feel like people had this reaction where, oh, the world's ending. Now what? Like, this should have been no surprise to anybody, in my opinion. Like, you knew this was coming. And the idea now that, well, it's just going to be the Wild Wild West. What has it been for at least 2 years?
Yeah, seriously.
It has been the Wild West for at least 2 years. I don't feel like, and I guess this is contrary to most people's opinion, I don't feel like this is a seismic change that just happened the day that the judge approved this. That Judge Wilkins signed that document and it's a seismic change. I don't think people are going to change the way they're doing business. And I look at the way that certain programs have been reacting to this. Greg Sankey had this ready to go the moment that the judge signed the document. You start listening to listening to the way that Greg Sankey was talking at SEC spring meetings with the media. Like, I mean, there's no question that when you listen to his voice and you hear him talk, like, you understand that in this bite I'm about to play for you, where we were talking about the college football playoff, and college athletics has been in a constant state of change, and that has not been easy for anybody.
The process of change is really exciting at the start. It's like running a marathon, which I've done a few times. Every time I've ever run a marathon, you can't sleep the night before. You're up early. You're at the start line. The start of anything is really exciting. And you go through that, and then you get to the end, and you see, running down Boylston in the Boston Marathon, or in Central Park in New York City, or crossing the river in Missoula, Montana to finish there. I mean, it's exciting, right? There's a finish line, the start and the
and we're at the finish line now,
right?
It's over now. Now we figure out who's got business acumen and who doesn't. I mean, you listen to, and I think this is a big conversation now. I think one of the singularly biggest conversations is, can the G5 survive? Can they thrive and survive and compete with the P4? Because I think when you listen to Boise State talking about how, oh, we're going to have a private equity deal done in 6 months, bro, 6 months might as well be a decade. Do you understand how far off into the distance 6 months is? And it feels like Boise State hadn't been working on this. That this house settlement comes out, and Boise State, who is supposed to be the world beater, and if one more Boise State fan tells me we're going to the P4, let me tell you, the upper echelon of the P4 already has plans in place. If you're waiting 6 months to try and just make a deal, I don't know how you survive that.
Yeah, well, I just don't. I think your best point is that this, it's not like this was some surprise, or that this was like some dealing that happened in the middle of the night and now everyone's got to react and kind of scramble. I mean, we've been talking about the house settlement for how long? And
years.
I think it's a situation where, I don't know if it's like, like kind of public posturing, if you will, or like there are strategies around this inside these athletic departments, but I don't understand, why these schools feel the need to comment that it's going to be 6 months from now, or like, why is it not today?
Yeah.
Like, why is it not yesterday? Why is it not as soon as possible? Like the idea, and again, my goal today is not to sit here and rip Jeremiah Dickey, the athletic director at Boise State, but I truly don't understand why you would come out and say it's going to be inside of 6 months. Like, just say as soon as possible, because that's the reality of it. And unfortunately, like, that kind of sends the message to me anyway, that you're not you were not preparing for this, or somehow that you were not like, I mean, obviously they were expecting it, but it's almost as if you weren't expecting it so soon, or like you were surprised that the timeline, was what it was. And that's where I struggle with this, because you're talking about an athletic director of a prominent institution that just committed to changing conferences, and going to a conference that isn't even an official conference yet, technically, not coming out and talking about revenue sharing. No, we're not going to talk about revenue sharing.
No.
We're going to talk about, private equity deals and what we can do that way to sort of send the message that we would be interested in revenue sharing, but we can't comment on it at that time, or maybe we're unwilling. And that's what I don't understand, because, I look at the stance that Utah, as an example, has taken with this house settlement situation. You can look around college football, but I think Utah is the best example of this. Bro, Utah's got a whole statement that they've rolled out,
ready to go,
ready to go, like dialed up. And the most fascinating portion of the statement, in my opinion, is this concept that they're talking about, the fact that Utah, and Mark Harlan in the statement has said, Utah is going to spend the max, or the word he used was invest. I shouldn't say spend. He used the word invest, the maximum amount that they can into this, in improving the point that, or making the point that, we're going to be as aggressive as possible. We're going to embrace this. We are going to be fully committed to
We're
this.
leaning in.
Yeah, we're leaning in. And I think that that's the biggest difference that I see in terms of divisiveness with this, is that you have institutions like Utah and many others that, that are leaning into this. Absolutely.
Through our existing Elevate U program, we've increased our investment with the addition of a brand strategy and governance team dedicated to providing Utah student athletes comprehensive support as they build their brand, enter into non-exclusive contracts for limited use rights for NIL and profit. And you look at the very first paragraph, as Jake mentioned, we're all in on investing up to the maximum allowable in revenue share, which is approximately $20.5 million.
So the stance is, at least as far as Utah is concerned, the stance is, not only are we embracing the new realities of college football, but we're going to publicly take the stance that we're fully committed to supporting our student athletes, to this verbiage about helping student athletes create their own brand. I think is fascinating, because when you think about like, if you just look at quarterbacks or college football players, we criticize. I remember all the heat that Jackson Dart got and that Arch Manning got when they did the NetJets deals, right? When they had NIL deals surrounding NetJets, and everyone's like, oh, why do college football players need private jets? Why would they need that? Why does Shador have this big ass watch on his wrist and the Rolls Royce? And I remember
NFL people hate that.
Yeah, NFL people think these kids are terrible, and Shador's an asshole, and he's way too in your face, yada, yada, yada. I remember all the laundry list of bad stuff you said about these people and these kids. And all I'm saying is that needs to change now. Because if your quarterback, or your best player, or maybe the better way to say is most high profile player on your team or in your athletic department, is not doing NIL deals and is not making a bunch of money, you're doing it wrong. And that's what I think that as fans and as observers, we have to get our hands around, is that at some point you got to be good with the fact that these kids are individual brands unto themselves. It's not, it is Utah football, but within that, who are the big brands inside the program bringing in revenue to the school? That's what I think we need to, get more comfortable with, that concept.
Yeah. And again, I just go back to, can the G5 survive? I think it's a huge question. We show you varying tweets. I mean, this is Utah's tweet, right? About, hey, we're all in. They had this prepared statement, all this new money. We are going $20.5 million in revenue sharing, the maximum. And then, as we mentioned, here's Boise State. Here's the story about Boise State actively considering bringing in.
Which again, what do you mean
private equity?
Actively considering?
Yeah, what does that mean that you're actively considering? What it means is you don't have a plan in place, and you don't have a private equity deal in place. It's the difference between operating at the highest levels of college sports and thinking you operate at the highest level of college sports. Doing and considering are two very different things. And it terrifies me for programs like Boise State, who by any measure is one of the elite small sports programs in this country. I think you look at football, I think you look at a basketball program that probably doesn't get the credit it deserves. But this is why. Because you don't have plans in place and forecasting, and you go to somebody like Utah, who, again, by any measure, is not one of the biggest revenue programs in the country. Nobody's ever going to accuse Utah of making the most money. Nobody's ever going to accuse Utah of being out front on NIL, being an industry lead. Nobody's ever going to say that. But yet, when the House settlement comes down, you have your athletic director and you have your NIL groups and your student athlete revenue generation system at a school known for being behind the curve. You have it all teed up and ready to go.
Yep.
That tells you that these games are not played on level playing fields. And I understand that, conferences like the American, the Pac-12, the Mountain West, you want to talk about equity. How on earth is the Pac-12 going to ramp up fast enough? You don't have a grant of rights, a TV deal. You don't have media rights distribution. And you're supposed to have private equity and an NIL strategy and a revenue sharing strategy. And that's the challenge of being a G5. And then you hop into, well, hey, we're expanding and adding all new teams. And you're just playing from behind the curve.
Yeah, and I feel like the House settlement puts schools at every level, not just the G5, but at every level, in a position where they have to be out for themselves more than they've ever been. I mean, you think about, you think about the disparity between the lower end Big 12 school versus the school that's competing to win the conference versus a bottom end SEC school. Like, these schools have to come up with their own unique ways of bringing in revenue to the athletic department to afford this. And,
yes.
And so the thing that surprises me that most people are not talking about, like pundits and things like that, is that this really is no longer a mechanical X's and O's conversation. This is a philosophical conversation that will lead you down one of two paths, meaning, the philosophy that Utah clearly is embracing and utilizing is clearly not the same philosophy that Boise State or other schools in that philosophy are using. And people complain for, gosh, I mean, it must be, years now since doing this show about, oh, well, the SEC's got an advantage, or Ohio State's got this advantage, or Texas, or, the Blue Bloods have this big financial advantage.
Yeah, dude.
Do you think that that's going to get better? Like, do you think that the House settlement mandating that you need to opt into revenue sharing at a level of $20.5 million, do you think that that's going to bring schools closer together financially? Because if you think that, I'm just telling you, you're not correct. This is going to divide the sport. This is going to say, okay, the folks who are in revenue sharing and are committed to that are also those same brands in same schools that likely are going to be interested in going on to things like a potential Super League down the line. Like, this is a proving ground for who's got the money.
I will even go a step further than that. We're forming the Super League right now. This is the first step. Getting the House settlement signed and approved by Judge Wilkin was the first step to creating this new entity. And you start hearing about this new enforcement stuff, and you start hearing about how, hey, who's going to be the one that is in charge of making sure that this is handled correctly and that the wild, wild west of NIL doesn't continue. Because, again, as I've been telling you for 18 months to 2 years, it was the wild, wild west. Quite literally, bagmen came out of the shadow and still had the bags full of cash that they were handing to athletes. And you start looking at this College Sports Commission, which is an independent body that will be responsible for implementing the settlement terms governing revenue sharing, student name, image, and likeness. Like, you start reading this and you understand the NCAA truly is at the end of its road.
Mm-hmm.
We are going into a time for football. And I think that's an important distinction for football, where football is going to be its own entity. Call it a super league, call it what you want. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is you look at this conversation about G5s and who can afford it and how many teams are going to be in this new entity or this super league. Well, that's going to work itself out, because I am telling you, there are the probably bottom 20% of the P4 are not going to want a revenue share.
No.
How many of that 20% will revenue share? I don't know. We'll find out.
Mhm.
But is it probably true that a lot of this revenue sharing in the P4 won't happen? I think that is a very small likelihood, tiny, minute, 1/10 of 1% that every P4 school opts in. We are going to have P4 schools that are like, nah, we could, we're not gonna.
Yeah, and I think want to is a perfect way to describe it. I mean, and this is not unique to college football, right? I mean, in life, you have those people that in your life who want to do certain things and they don't want to do other things. I mean, that's how we work as people. And I think that universities that have athletic departments with power football clubs are tasked with deciding what path do we want to go down here, because if you don't revenue share, that's going to crush your football program. But can you afford that in your athletic department? Versus, hey, well, if we do revenue share, that's going to cost us $20.5 million that, frankly, we don't have. So, excuse me for wondering, why in the hell is it going to take 6 months to do a private equity deal from today? Why does it take that long? Are you telling me that it's that complicated to do a private equity deal for a college football program or a school? Like, obviously, it's a new thing, and I understand that people got to get comfortable with it. But, bro, 6 months by business terms is a long time. I mean, I could understand 6 weeks. Like, hey, you got to hammer out numbers and, there's paperwork and process. Okay, cool. I get that. But 6 months, like, for me, that feels like a really, really long time and feels like you're dragging your feet, especially as a school. And I don't mean this in a disrespectful fashion, but especially for a school like Boise State that's at the G5 level that clearly, and I don't even think any of us disagree on this, clearly has aspirations of being a power school at some point, right? They obviously, I'm just assuming that part of the mission with the Pac-12 move is to try to walk a path that leads you back to being a power conference / power school. But the point is that, bro, if it's taking you 6 months to do private equity deals, like, what is the decision-making process on trying to revenue share? That's my main concern with schools that are in Boise State situation or a power school that's at the bottom end of a conference that maybe isn't super passionate about it. Because we've all been sitting here saying, okay, well, what about these low-end Big Ten schools? What about these lower-end SEC schools? Well, here's the deal. What do you think those schools have been doing for the last 5 years or 4 years or 3 years? They've been sitting here stockpiling their money, not being good at football, but getting the big TV checks so that they can afford to do this.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of time, I think, and until this happens. Because I got to be honest with you, I was talking to, some TV people today about the future of college sports. I think the real line in the sand, if you will be where TV money goes. And there's a lot of people who think the TV money is going to come down, but private equity and sponsorship deals are going to skyrocket. And that's going to make people more money, because I do believe that at some point we see TV partners do in college football what they've done in the NFL, which is take an active stake in the sport. Because if the NFL fails and fewer people are watching the NFL, well, who's making less money? Everybody.
But what's the only way that they can actually do something like that?
Well, you're
you've
going to
gotta
have to form a new entity that has
rules and
antitrust
regulations.
exemptions. Yeah. And you're going to have to be able to control movement of players.
Because I can tell you right now, they're unable to do that with the size and scope of college football, which is one of, frankly, it maybe not even one of. I feel, in my opinion, that's the core issue for college football specifically, is that you have so many schools and obviously so many teams involved that there's no way to kind of streamline the process or bring in private equity, which is why you're hearing so much about super leagues and forming a new entity inside of it, and trying to have antitrust and rules and regulations, so that they have to do that.